GM PIC at Bigmint, now joining us. Nishtha, afternoon, and thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us here on ET Now. And first up, let's talk about the objective as to why the government has gone ahead and done this. What do you think is the government aiming to achieve by shifting from quantitative restrictions that were in place earlier, or that is something that the government could have done, but the government has rather imposed a provisional anti-dumping duty on low ash met coke? What is the objective in your opinion?
Shisha, metallurgical coke, again a critical input across multiple industries. So just to give you a brief, the steel industry uses it as a primary source of fuel, and met coke also finds its usage in foundries, ferroalloys units as well. So Indian blast furnace mills either can use metallurgical coke, which they make out of coking coal, or they can import it directly. So again, Indian government long back had taken this initiative to support the domestic production of met coke, which was a part of the broader self-reliance goals like Make in India movement. The recent anti-dumping duty, targets mainly the unfairly priced imports that were happening, rather than placing, absolute volume caps in terms of quantitative restrictions which were imposed earlier, which ended on 31st of December 2025. So it seems that this will ensure domestic producers to get price protection against the dumped imports, while steelmakers, on the other hand, can still retain access to imports if needed.
That was the objective and the rationale as to why the government went ahead and imposed that anti-dumping duty. But let's also talk about some important facts and figures. Met coke imports have already fallen by nearly 20% on a year-on-year basis in the first half of FY26. Now that the government has gone ahead and imposed anti-dumping duty, do you expect a sharper decline in the coming months?
Yes, very correctly mentioned that imports have already fallen by 20% year-on-year basis in first half of this fiscal. And going forward, yes, we expect more sharper decline in the import volumes, given the price viability post imposition of anti-dumping, as the landed costs would get costlier, and the smaller players would resort to sourcing it from the domestic market rather than going for imports. However, the bigger steel mills may continue volumes. So overall volumes of India are likely to drop in the near term.
Okay, so you're saying that perhaps imports into India could fall on account of these anti-dumping duties. But what kind of impact will this have on coke prices then, which have already risen by 2,500 rupees per ton since October? Is there any room for further hike in the domestic market?
Yes. So if we compare on the prices of landed cost of imports and the prevailing domestic prices, so there is an indication that the recent anti-dumping announcement could lead to a hike in domestic met coke prices, and we can expect a hike of around INR 500 to 1,000 per ton in the near short term. And going forward, again, it would depend upon the multiple factors about the acceptability, steel price support, and if there are additional supplies that we could see in the merchant market. Because in India, if we talk about the merchant supplies may see an improvement post the anti-dumping announcement. So yes, these are some factors which would actually govern the impact on prices in the near term.
Understood. And let's also talk about a demand supply equation. India's merchant met coke production stood at about 4 million tons. Is domestic supply then sufficient to meet steel sector demand in the absence of low ash imports, especially because the government has now imposed anti-dumping duty? We will not be able to import as much at the cheaper price at which we used to do earlier.
India's merchant met coke installed capacity is close to 8 million tons, while the actual production that we saw in the last fiscal was close to 4 million tons. So, yes, the domestic met coke industry of, if we talk about, is underutilized, and we expect that in the near term the capacity utilization would increase, given that imports are likely to slow down, and hence people would shift towards domestic sourcing. However, yes, there are some benefits that imported met coke also offers, given the more consistent CSR, lower ash, and better sizing material that generally we get in the imported met coke versus a larger part of the India's domestic supply.
And Nishta, what kind of impact do you foresee on input costs and margins of consuming sectors, especially for steel, because this is a raw material which is mainly used for steel manufacturing? Now that costs are expected to inch higher for steel producers, do you expect their costs and margins consequently to be impacted on account of higher prices?
Fuel costs generally accounts for 30 to 35% in India's steel making. So yes, an uptick in the input cost would definitely reflect in the steel prices as well, which would be passed on to the end users.
Understood. And if the duties, Nishtha, are extended beyond the 6-month time frame, 6 months is the time frame that the government has set as of now. But if at all it were to be extended beyond 6 months, how will this reshape India's met coke trade flows and domestic pricing trends? If you can take us through that, and if prices were to rise now in the short term, will it be a structural story, and do you expect prices to correct later if it is not extended beyond 6 months?
Although too early to comment on this, but yes, if it is extended beyond 6 months, we can expect a further drop in import volumes. Uh, uh, since I already mentioned that domestic supplies are also gaining momentum, so upward cap on prices would also be there, and acceptability from steel, etc., would be also factors that would continue to impact met coke prices.
Let's also talk about the ash coke content above 18%, that segment, because that continues to remain outside the duty framework, right? Will this have any bearing on the kind of ash coke that we import? Will quality be impacted on account of this?
Not much, because the one which is not covered under it is not largely used by the Indian steel industry.
You're saying that because of the kind of announcement that the government has come up with, this will largely not have any impact, especially for ash content above 18%. Am I getting you right?
Yes.
Okay, understood. So that's the impact on the latest notification that government came up with. Nishtha, thanks so much for taking your time out and joining us here on ET Now. So let's low down on the latest notification and the kind of impact steel industry will have on account of anti-dumping duty which is imposed on low ash met coke. Thanks so much for joining us with all those details. But shifting focus then and now to our next segment, did you know? Today we put the spotlight on chocolates. In fact, did you know the first chocolate bar was created way back in 1847? The world's largest chocolate bar weighed over 12,000 pounds. The first chocolate factory was established in 1728, and the largest chocolate sculpture ever made weighed over 22,000 pounds. Let's also put the spotlight on some other facts and figures. Switzerland has the highest per capita chocolate consumption. Per capita chocolate consumption in India is just 100 to 200 grams per year, which is much lower than the world average of 900 grams. That's all the time we have on this edition of Commodity Central, but don't go anywhere. Newsroom will come up next.